Tonight, 9 true horror stories from small towns across America. Not fiction. Real experiences from places where everyone knows your name. A neighbor in Alabama who stood on my porch every night at 2 a.m. A red truck in Iowa that knew my route better than I did. A family diner in Kentucky where his uncle was the sheriff. A church in Minnesota that chose my husband's version over mine. A man with a clipboard in West Virginia who asked who lived alone. A high school reunion in Texas that brought back the wrong face. A logging town in Oregon where his family ran everything. An empty house in New Hampshire that wasn't empty. And a bar regular in Wisconsin who waited for the night I closed alone. Millbrook, Cedar Falls, Bishop's Creek, Stillwater, Hollow Ridge, Red Oak, Pine Grove, Millerton, Ashford. 9 towns, 9 survivors. Let's get into it. Story 1, Millbrook, Alabama. Birch Lane, Millbrook, population 1,200. 1 stoplight at Main and 3rd. You know the one that turns red at the wrong time. The feed store, Millbrook Feed, the sign faded, the smell of grain and leather when you walk in. The kind of smell that stays in your clothes. The Piggly Wiggly where everyone knows your cart. The Baptist church on the corner, white steeple, the same families in the same pews every Sunday. I'd moved there from Birmingham after my divorce, rented the little house at 412 Birch, white siding, porch swing, the pecan tree in the front yard. Millbrook Feed was 2 blocks down. I worked the register 3 days a week. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. Bags of chicken feed, horse feed, the occasional tractor part. Old Mr. Davis came in every Tuesday for his dog food. Mrs. Perkins bought birdseed. The ceiling fans turned slow. The screen door banged when someone came in. In summer, the floor was warm where the sun hit it. In winter, the heat from the wood stove made the air thick. Knew everyone by face if not by name. That's how small towns work. You wave. You know who belongs. You know when something's off. Walt Driscoll lived at 408, 4 doors down, the house with the overgrown azaleas and the pickup truck that never moved. Brown Ford, dust on the windshield. He'd retired from the paper mill in Prattville, widower. His wife had died 5 years before I moved in. I'd heard that from Mrs. Perkins at the feed store. Everyone knew everyone's business. He'd kept to himself. He'd mow his lawn. He'd sit on his porch. He'd nod when I passed. I thought he was just a quiet old man. I'd thought a lot of things. I'd nod when I passed. He'd nod back. Normal. Then October. I started noticing him at the feed store. Not buying anything, just standing by the door watching. I'd be stacking bags of chicken feed and feel his eyes. I'd turn. He'd look away. I told myself he was lonely. I told myself small towns were like that. Old men with nothing to do. Old men who'd lost their wives and didn't know how to fill the hours. I'd tell myself that when I saw him at the feed store. I'd tell myself that when I felt his eyes. Then the note started. Slipped under my door, handwritten. The first one said he'd noticed I got home around 6 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Said he wanted me to know he was watching the street, making sure nothing seemed off. I'd never told him my schedule. I'd never told him anything. I'd maybe said good morning once, twice. How did he know? I worked Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays at the feed store. I got home around 6 on the days I worked. Had he been watching? Had he been counting? Had he been standing at his window when I pulled into the driveway? The thought made my skin crawl. I thought the curtains were just curtains. I thought the quiet was just small town quiet. I'd wave at him sometimes. He'd wave back. I'd tell myself that was normal, neighborly. I'd tell myself I was being paranoid. The second note said he'd heard me on the phone with my sister the night before, heard me crying. He wanted me to know he was there if I needed someone. I hadn't been crying. I'd been laughing. My sister had told a joke about our nephew, the one about the frog and the birthday cake. The walls are thin in old houses. But the way he'd phrased it, like he'd been listening, like he'd been standing there, like he knew the difference between crying and laughing and had chosen to say crying anyway. I went to Sheriff Tate. The office is in the old courthouse on Main. Wood floors, the smell of coffee and old paper. He knew Walt. Everyone knew Walt. They'd served together in Vietnam. They'd had coffee at the same table at the VFW for decades. He said Walt had lived in Millbrook 40 years. Never caused trouble. Good man. Widower. He talked to him. He did. Walt apologized. Said he'd been drinking. Said he'd heard someone crying and wanted to help. The sheriff had looked at me when he said it. He'd looked at me like he was wondering if I was the kind of person who overreacted, if I was the kind of person who made trouble. I'd wanted to show him the notes. I'd left them at home. I'd thought he'd believe me without them. I'd been wrong. Said he'd been drinking. Said he'd heard someone crying and wanted to help. The sheriff shrugged, said to let him know if it happened again. It happened again. The scratching at night, like something dragging along the shared fence between our yards, chain link. Rusted in places, I'd lie in bed and listen. Left, right, pause, left, right, pause, deliberate coming from his side. I'd press my hand to the wall, I'd feel the vibration. I started sleeping with my headphones on. I'd play white noise, I'd play podcasts. Nothing drowned it out completely. Through the wall, through my pillow. Our bedrooms shared a wall. The houses were close, built when land was cheap. He was scratching from his side, toward mine. I bought a camera, pointed it at my door. First night, 2:14 a.m. He was there, standing on my porch, not knocking, not moving. 23 minutes. I watched the timestamp. My hands were shaking. I'd been at my sister's. I'd woken up at 2. I'd checked the app out of habit. I'd seen him. The second night, 2:11 a.m. The third, 2:18 a.m. I started keeping a log, dates, times. I'd wake up at 2 and check. He'd be there every night. Same time, same place. I didn't know what he was waiting for. I didn't want to find out. Same time, same place. I went back to the sheriff with the footage. He said Walt had a condition, sleepwalking. Without a direct threat or forced entry, nothing they could do. What would count as a direct threat? He'd have to say something, do something. Standing on my porch every night at 2 a.m. wasn't something. They'd talk to him again. They did. He kept doing it. I asked my landlord, Mrs. Holloway, she lives in Montgomery, to let me out of my lease. She said no, penalty, 2 months rent. I didn't have it. I started sleeping at my sister's in Wetumpka. Drove the 40 minutes every night. Went back to 412 only to shower and grab clothes. I'd go during the day when I knew Walt was at the feed store or the VFW. Mondays he had his veterans group. Wednesdays he'd sometimes be at the Piggly Wiggly. I'd check the camera first. I'd watch the feed on my phone from my sister's driveway. I'd only go when the porch was clear. I'd listen at the door before I opened it. I'd stand there with my ear against the wood, holding my breath. The house smelled different when I was only there to grab clothes, stale, like I was already a stranger. The mail would pile up. The plants would die. I'd water them when I remembered. I'd tell myself I was still the person who lived there. I'd tell myself I hadn't been run out of my own home. The truth was I had. I just hadn't admitted it yet. I'd become someone I didn't recognize. Someone who was always listening, always checking, always afraid. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and check the camera. I'd do it even when I was at my sister's. I'd do it from her guest room. I'd stare at the screen. I'd wait for him to appear. I'd feel relief when he did, because at least I knew where he was. At least he wasn't somewhere else. Birch Lane in the afternoon, the oak trees, the quiet. I'd walk past and feel like I was going to a crime scene. My own house, my own life. Then Tuesday, I'd check the feed. Porch empty. I was in the bedroom grabbing clothes when I heard my lock turn. No knock, no buzz. I hadn't given anyone a key. I grabbed my phone and backed into the bathroom. Footsteps, then his voice. He said he knew I was home. He said the landlord had let him in, told her he was checking the pipes, that we shared a line. He said he just wanted to talk. I called 911. I stayed in that bathroom until the sheriff arrived. I didn't make a sound. He stood in my living room for 15 minutes. I could hear him through the door, moving, pausing, moving again. I'd pressed my back against the bathroom door. I'd had my phone in my hand. 911 had said help was on the way. I'd listened to his footsteps. I'd listened to him in my kitchen. I'd listened to him in my bedroom. I'd thought about the scissors in the drawer. I'd thought about the window. I'd thought about whether I could fit through it. I'd thought about whether he'd hear me try. Walt had a forged work order. Mrs. Holloway had never met him. He'd called her, said he was from the water company. She'd given him the key. She told me later she'd felt bad about it. She'd said he'd sounded so official. She'd said she'd never do that again. I'd wanted to tell her it was too late, for me. For the woman I'd been before I'd heard my lock turn. They arrested him, trespassing. The sheriff had come himself. He'd known Walt. He'd looked at him like he was seeing him for the first time. He'd said he was sorry. I'd never known if he meant it. I'd stood in the hallway while they'd cuffed him. I'd listened to Walt argue. I'd listened to him say he just wanted to talk. I'd thought about the bathroom door. I'd thought about the 15 minutes. I'd thought about what would have happened if I hadn't had my phone. He'd had a forged work order. He'd called Mrs. Holloway from a number that showed up as Water Company on her caller ID. He told her he was doing a pipe inspection, that our houses shared a line, that he needed access. She'd given him the key. She'd never met him. She'd never verified. She'd apologized when I told her. She'd said she'd never do that again. I moved out the next week, ate the penalty. 2 months' rent, I didn't care. I packed what I could fit in my car. I left the rest. I left the porch swing. I left the pecan tree. I left the life I thought I was building. Last I heard, he's out on bond, court date pending. I don't know if he'll do time. I don't know if he'll be back on Birch Lane. I don't go to Millbrook anymore. I'm in Wetumpka now. Different county, different faces. I got a job at a different feed store. I don't work Tuesdays, Thursdays, or Saturdays anymore. I work different days. I take different routes. I live in an apartment with thick walls. I don't know my neighbors' names. I prefer it that way. I still check my door 3 times before I sleep. I still startle when I hear footsteps on the porch. I still look at the pecan tree in the front yard and remember the house I thought would be my fresh start. Millbrook was supposed to be safe. The kind of place where you didn't lock your doors. The kind of place where everyone waved. Walt Driscoll had lived there 40 years. Everyone had trusted him. If your neighbor makes you uncomfortable, trust it. Document. Tell your landlord. And never assume that small towns mean small dangers. The woman I was before Walt, the one who'd wave at neighbors, who'd leave the door unlocked, who'd believe that Millbrook was the kind of place where nothing bad happened. I don't know where she went. I hope she's somewhere safe. I hope she's found another town. I hope she's learned to lock the door. Sometimes the danger isn't in the house next door. Sometimes it's in the truck that's been behind you since you left the Piggly Wiggly. Sometimes it's the vehicle you see in the rear view every morning. The one you tell yourself is a coincidence. The one that knows your route better than you do. Story 2, Cedar Falls, Iowa. Cedar Falls, population 2,400, corn and soybeans. The Casey's on Highway 218, the one with the good pizza, the library on Main, the Lutheran church where my mother had been baptized, where I'd been confirmed, where we'd gone every Sunday until she'd gotten sick. I'd moved back after my mom got sick to help, to be close. She'd had a stroke. She'd needed someone. I'd left my life in Des Moines. I'd left my apartment. I'd left my job. I'd come home. I'd thought it would be temporary. I thought I'd help her recover and then go back. I took a job at the clinic on Oak Street, front desk, checking people in, scheduling appointments, the kind of job where you learn everyone's name, where everyone learns yours. Front desk, 9 to 5, same route every day. Down Maple, the street with the old maples that turned gold in fall, left on Second, past the post office where Mrs. Ingram sold stamps, past the hardware store with the bins of nails out front, past the coffee shop run by the Hanson family. The Hansons made the best cinnamon rolls in the county. I'd stop sometimes on the way in. Everyone knew my order. Everyone knew my car, the silver Honda I'd driven since college. A 2012. A dent in the passenger door from a shopping cart. In a town of 2,400, it might as well have been a license plate. Everyone knew my car. Everyone knew my schedule. That's the thing about small towns. Convenience. Comfort, until it isn't. The truck started in November. Red F-150. I'd see it in the Casey's parking lot when I stopped for gas. I'd see it parked on Maple when I walked to work. I'd see it in the rear view on the drive to the clinic. I told myself it was coincidence. Cedar Falls is small. Same people, same routes. Everyone drives the same roads. Everyone stops at the same Casey's. I told myself a lot of things. Then I saw it outside my mother's house. I was staying with her, the old place on Cedar Lane, the one with the wraparound porch. The truck was parked across the street, engine off. No one inside. I'd stood at the living room window. I'd watched it. I told myself to go out to see the plates to get proof. My feet hadn't moved. I went out. It was gone. I asked the neighbors. No one had seen it. The next week it was at the clinic. Parked in the lot when I got there, still there when I left. I started paying attention. The driver was a man, 40s. I never got a clear look at his face. Baseball cap, sunglasses, but I knew the truck, I knew the timing. I went to the sheriff. Lynn County Sheriff's office over in Central City, 20 minutes away. The drive felt long. The waiting room felt longer. I'd sat there with my folder of notes. The times I'd seen the truck, the places. The license plate number I'd finally gotten one morning when he'd been parked at Casey's and I'd walked past like I was going to the ATM. The deputy was polite. Tired eyes. Nameplate on the desk. Deputy Collins. He'd heard this before. I could tell from the way he'd asked the questions. From the way he'd looked at my folder like it was evidence of something. Paranoia, maybe. Overreaction. He'd heard it from women who'd worried about nothing. He'd heard it from women who'd been right to worry. He asked if the man had contacted me. Threatened me. I said no. He said without that there wasn't much they could do. Vary my routine, stay aware. I wanted to scream that I had. I'd tried different routes. I'd left at different times. The truck was still there. In a town of 2,400, everyone knows your car. Everyone knows your schedule. Everyone knows where you work, where you live, where you go on Sundays. Vary my routine, I tried. Different routes. Different times, left late some days, left early others. The truck was there. Not every time, enough. Enough that I stopped believing in coincidence. I started documenting photos when I could get them. License plate numbers, I'd write down the times, the locations. Casey's, Tuesday, 7:15 a.m. Maple and Second, Wednesday, 8:45 a.m. Clinic parking lot, Thursday, 4:30 p.m. The pattern was clear. I wasn't imagining it. I told my mom. She said to stay with my sister in Waterloo. I said I wouldn't let him run me out. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I came home and found a note on my windshield. My mother's house. My car, parked in the driveway. The same driveway I'd played in as a kid. The note was under the wiper, folded, neat. The paper was plain, the kind from the drugstore on Second, the one next to the hardware store. The handwriting was careful. I'd stood there in the driveway. The sun had been going down. The neighbors had been pulling in. No one had stopped. No one had asked if I was okay. I just stood there with the note in my hand and felt the world tilt. The handwriting was careful, like he'd taken his time, like he'd wanted to get it right. The note said he'd been watching me. Said he'd been watching for a while, said he knew I worked at the clinic, knew I lived on Cedar Lane, knew I took my mother to church on Sundays, said he'd wanted me to know. Said he'd wanted me to know he was there. He'd signed it with a heart. I'd stood there with it in my hand. The street had been quiet. The porch light had been on. My mother had been inside. She'd been watching her shows. She hadn't heard anything. She hadn't seen anything. I'd thought about showing her. I'd thought about not showing her. I'd thought about protecting her from this. I'd shown the sheriff instead. I'd driven to Central City. I'd sat in the waiting room. I'd shown him the note. I'd shown him my folder. I'd asked what they could do. He'd taken it seriously this time. He'd said they'd run the plates. He'd said they'd look into it. It hadn't been enough. I showed the sheriff. He took it seriously this time. They ran the plates. The truck had been spotted. Registered to a man named Ray Hodges. Lived in a trailer off County Road 42. No record. No restraining orders. They couldn't do anything without a direct threat. The note wasn't enough. They said it was creepy but not illegal. They said to document everything. They said to get a restraining order if he contacted me again. He never did. He never had to. He'd made his point. He knew where I lived. He knew where I worked. He knew my mother's address. He knew we went to church on Sundays. In a town that small, knowledge was enough. I stayed with my sister. I quit the clinic. I gave 2 weeks' notice. I couldn't face the drive. I couldn't face the parking lot. I couldn't face the possibility of seeing that truck again. I moved my mother to Waterloo. She'd lived in Cedar Falls for 30 years. She'd raised us there. She'd had her bridge club. She'd had her church. I'd had to tell her we were leaving. She'd had her bridge club on Thursdays. She'd grown tomatoes in the backyard. She'd loved that porch. I'd had to tell her we were leaving. I'd had to watch her pack. I'd had to drive her away from the only place she'd ever called home. She'd cried when we'd pulled out of the driveway. I'd cried too. I'd pretended I didn't see. I'd focused on the road. I told myself we were doing the right thing. I'd tell myself that a lot in the months that followed. I lost the job. I lost the house. I lost the town I'd grown up in. The clinic where I'd known every patient's name. The library where I'd gotten my first library card. The Lutheran church where she'd been baptized, where I'd been confirmed. He'd taken all of it without ever saying a word to my face, without ever touching me, without ever doing anything the law could call a crime. Last I heard, Ray Hodges still lives on County Road 42. The truck's still red. I drive through Cedar Falls sometimes when I visit my sister. I take different routes now. I don't stop at the Casey's on Highway 218. I don't look at the clinic on Oak Street. I don't drive down Maple. I don't drive past the house on Cedar Lane. My mother asks about it sometimes. She says she misses it. She says she misses the porch. She says she misses the place she'd lived for 30 years. I tell her I understand. I don't tell her I miss it too. I don't tell her I miss the person I was before I saw that truck, before I found that note, before I learned that in a town that small, being known isn't always safe. The town I'd moved back to help my mother, I'd lost it. And the worst part was that he'd never done anything the law could hold him for. No threats, no contact, just watching, just waiting. If you're being followed, document everything, tell people. And if your gut says run, run, don't wait for permission. My mother has a new house now in Waterloo. She has a new church. She has new neighbors. She says she's fine. She says she doesn't miss Cedar Lane. I don't know if that's true. I don't ask. Some losses are too big to talk about. Some losses you just carry. In Bishop's Creek, the danger wasn't on the road. It was behind the counter, and everyone in town knew his last name. Sometimes the person who harasses you is the one whose family signs your paycheck, the one whose uncle answers the 911 call, the one you can't report without losing everything. Story 3, Bishop's Creek, Kentucky *. Bishop's Creek, population 1,800. The creek runs through town. You can hear it from Main Street when the water's high. A low rush in the spring, bony trickle in August. The old mill, the one they tried to turn into a craft market. It hadn't taken. Nothing had taken. Bishop's Creek had peaked in the 90s and been sliding ever since. The one that had closed in the 90s. The one that had left Bishop's Creek with 2 employers and not much else. The diner on Main, Marjorie's, been there since 1962. Red vinyl booths. The jukebox in the corner. The smell of coffee and bacon. I'd gotten the job at 17, I'd needed the money. My dad had left when I was 12. My mom had worked at the Piggly Wiggly. Minimum wage. We'd needed every dollar. Waitress. Cash under the table. My mom needed the money. Marjorie was kind. She'd known my grandmother. She'd give me extra when business was slow. She'd let me take home leftovers when we had too much. She treated me like family until I'd needed her to choose. Her son Travis ran the kitchen. He'd been doing it since his daddy died. Heart attack, 3 years ago. Marjorie had needed someone. Travis had needed something to do. The diner had become his kingdom. He was 23, handsome in that way that made the other girls giggle. I didn't giggle. I'd seen the way he looked at me when no one else was watching. The leering, the comments. You fill out that apron nice. When you gonna let me take you out? I'd laugh it off. I needed the job. Bishop's Creek had 2 employers, the diner and the lumber yard. The lumber yard wasn't hiring. McConnell's Lumber. It had laid off half the crew the year before. I'd tried. I'd gotten the diner job because Marjorie had known my grandmother. Small towns work like that. Travis started cornering me in the walk-in. The walk-in was small shelves of lettuce, tomatoes, the smell of cold. Marjorie's got produce from the distributor in Lexington every Tuesday. I'd be putting away the delivery, the lettuce, the tomatoes, the onions, and he'd appear in the doorway. He'd stand there. He'd let the door close behind him. The walk-in had one exit. He'd block it. He'd say he was grabbing something. He'd take his time. Once he'd made me wait 5 minutes. 5 minutes in the cold with my arms full of lettuce. 5 minutes of him standing in the doorway looking at me. The other girls had laughed when I'd come out shivering. They'd said I was slow. They hadn't seen his face. He'd take his time. I'd stand there with my arms full of produce waiting. The cold would seep through my apron. He'd brush against me when he passed. Sorry, he'd say. He wasn't sorry. He'd wait until I was inside, then block the door. Accidentally brushing against me when I passed. Standing too close when I was at the register. Once he put his hand on my waist when I reached for a coffee cup. I jerked away. He'd laughed like it was a game. I told Marjorie. She sighed. She said Travis was going through a phase. He'd been different since his daddy died. She'd talked to him. She did. He stopped for 2 weeks. Then he was back. Worse. He'd grab my wrist when I walked by. He'd whisper things in my ear. Things I won't repeat. Things that made me feel dirty. Things that made me want to quit right there, but I needed the money. My mom's electric bill, my brother's school supplies. The diner was the only job in town that would hire me. I told Marjorie again. I showed her the bruised wrist. She'd looked at it. She'd looked away. She said she couldn't fire her own son. The diner was family. Travis was family. I was just the help. I'd stood there with my bruised wrist. I'd stood there looking at the woman who'd known my grandmother, who'd given me extra when business was slow, who'd treated me like family, until I'd needed her to choose, until I'd needed her to choose me over her son. She'd chosen him. She'd always choose him. I'd known that when I walked out of her office. I'd known I was alone. The diner was family. I'd have to work it out. I asked for different shifts. She said the schedule was the schedule. I started wearing long sleeves in July, started avoiding the walk-in. I'd ask one of the other girls to grab things. They'd look at me funny, started counting the minutes until my shift ended. The diner closed at 9. I'd watch the clock. 8:45, 8:50, 8:55. The last customers would leave. Marjorie would count the register. Travis would be in the kitchen wiping down. I'd grab my bag. I'd head for the door. Sometimes he'd say good night. Sometimes he'd watch me walk to my car. I'd learned to park under the streetlight. I'd learned to have my keys in my hand. I'd learned a lot of things I shouldn't have had to learn at 17. Then the day he followed me to the parking lot. I'd stayed late to help close. Marjorie had left. Travis was supposed to lock up. I was at my car, my mom's old Buick, parked behind the diner when I heard the door. The lot was dark. The streetlight didn't reach back there. Bishop's Creek at 9:30. The street was quiet. The lumber yard was across the street. I thought that meant I wasn't alone. I'd been wrong. He was there. He'd come out the back door, the one from the kitchen. He'd said he wanted to talk. I'd said I had to go. He'd stepped between me and the driver's door. He'd put his hand on the roof of the car. He'd leaned in. He'd said I'd been leading him on, said I'd been asking for it. Said no one would believe me if I said different. His mom owned the diner. His uncle was the sheriff. I'd backed away. I'd put my hands up. I'd said get away from me. I'd said it twice. 3 times my voice had cracked. He'd leaned closer. He'd said I was being dramatic. I'd yelled. The lumber yard was across the street. McConnell's. A night shift, 2 guys loading trucks. I'd yelled. I'd yelled so loud my throat hurt. I'd yelled leave me alone and get away, and I don't remember what else. One of them heard me. He came out. He was big. He had a wrench in his hand. Travis looked at him. Travis looked at me. He'd smiled, like he'd won something. Then he left. He didn't run. He walked, like he'd done nothing wrong, like he'd had every right to be there. I quit the next day. I never went back to Marjorie's. I told my mom. She wanted me to report it. I said it wouldn't matter. Travis's uncle was the sheriff. She said we'd try anyway. We did. The sheriff, Travis's uncle, took a statement. He'd looked at me when I'd told him. He'd looked at me like he was wondering if I'd led Travis on, like he was wondering if I'd asked for it. He'd said he'd look into it. He never did. I'd called a week later. I'd asked if there were any updates. He'd said these things took time. He'd said I should focus on moving on. I got a job at the grocery store in the next county. 30-minute drive each way. The pay was less. The hours were worse. I didn't care. I'd take anything that wasn't Marjorie's. I'd take anything that wasn't Travis. I left Bishop's Creek at 20. I packed my things. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't tell Marjorie. I didn't tell the other waitresses. I just didn't show up for my shift. I left my apron in the break room. I left my tips in the jar. I left and I didn't look back. I haven't been back. Not for the creek, not for the old mill, not for my mom's birthday when she begged me to come. I make excuses. I send presents. I don't explain. My mom still lives there. She says Travis runs the diner now. She says Marjorie retired. She says the sheriff's still his uncle. She says some things don't change. Last I heard, Travis runs the diner now. Marjorie retired. Workplace harassment doesn't always look like yelling. Sometimes it's the owner's son, and sometimes the whole town is on his side. Sometimes the sheriff is his uncle. Sometimes the diner is the only job in town. Sometimes you're 17 and you need the money and you tell yourself it's not that bad until the day he follows you to the parking lot and steps between you and your car. Document everything. Report in writing. Get copies. And if they don't believe you, leave. Your safety is worth more than the job. I'm 24 now. I work at a hotel in Lexington. The pay is better. The hours are better. No one corners me in the walk-in. No one's uncle is the sheriff. I still think about Bishop's Creek sometimes. I still think about the girl I was. I still wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. I'm glad I'll never know. In Stillwater, the danger didn't come from a stranger. It came from the people who'd known you your whole life. Sometimes the person who hurts you is the one everyone loves, the one from the good family, the one the church chose to believe, the one you married. Story 4, Stillwater, Minnesota. Stillwater. Population 19,000, bigger than the others, but it feels small. Everyone knows everyone. The church on the hill, the coffee shop on Main, the one with the worn wooden tables and the good scones. The same families, the same pews, the same gossip. Someone always knew before you said it. I'd grown up there. My parents had too. We went to Grace Lutheran, the church on the hill. White steeple. The same families, the same pews, the same potlucks. My mom taught Sunday school. My dad was on the council. He'd helped raise money for the new organ. The Petersons had donated half. I was the good girl, the one who didn't cause trouble, the one who got good grades, the one who'd never given her parents a reason to worry, until I'd married Joel, until I'd given them every reason and they hadn't wanted to see it. The one who got married at 22 to a boy from church. His name was Joel Peterson. His family had been in Stillwater for 5 generations. His father owned the hardware store. His mother ran the women's auxiliary. When Joel hit me the first time, a slap across the face after I disagreed with him at his parents' dinner table, I told myself it was stress. We'd been at the Peterson house on Oak Street, Sunday dinner, his mother's pot roast. I'd said something about the store, the hours maybe, or the way his father treated the employees. Joel had gone quiet. In the car on the way home, he'd asked what I'd meant. I'd said I hadn't meant anything. He'd slapped me hard. My head had hit the window. I'd sat there with my hand on my cheek. The car had kept moving. The streetlights had passed. I'd looked at my reflection in the window. He'd apologized before we got home. He'd been stressed. His dad had been sick. The store was struggling. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. It did. It got worse. A punch to the arm, a shove, a hand around my throat in the kitchen when I'd said I was going to my mother's. The bruises were always where clothes could cover them. The excuses were always ready. I'd bumped into something. I'd fallen. Slipped. He was careful. He was smart. He knew how to hide. He knew how to make me doubt myself. He knew how to make me think I was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I'd said the wrong thing. Maybe I deserved it. He'd say that after. He'd say he was sorry. He'd say he'd lost his temper. He'd say it wouldn't happen again. He'd bring flowers. He'd plan a nice dinner. He'd be the Joel everyone else saw. The Joel from church. The Joel from the hardware store. The Joel my parents loved. And I'd believe him. I'd believe him because I wanted to. I'd believe him because the alternative was too big. The alternative was leaving. The alternative was losing everything. So I'd stay. I'd stay until the next time. I'd stay until the night I finally didn't. I thought about leaving. I thought about telling someone, but who? The pastor. Joel's family had donated the new organ, my parents. They loved Joel. They'd never believe me. The police. Joel's cousin was a deputy. I tried once, mentioned it to a friend from church, Rachel. We'd been in confirmation class together. We'd been bridesmaids in each other's weddings. I'd met her for coffee at the place on Main. I'd said things had been hard. I'd said Joel had a temper. I hadn't said he'd hit me. I hadn't known how. She'd said I should pray about it. She'd said marriage was hard. She'd said Joel was a good man. Everyone knew that. She'd said I was lucky. She told Joel I'd said something. I don't know exactly what. I know he came home that night and asked me what I'd been telling people. I know he took my phone. I know he took my keys. I know I didn't talk to Rachel again. He took my phone. He took my keys. He said if I ever talked about our private life again, he'd make sure everyone knew I was unstable, crazy, a liar. He'd already started. Small comments to his mother, to his friends. She's been so anxious lately. She doesn't sleep well. She gets confused sometimes. By the time I finally left, half the church thought I was the problem, the unstable one, the one who'd left a good man, the one who'd made things up. I tried to tell my mother. I'd gone over for coffee. I'd said Joel had a temper. I'd said I was scared. She'd said all marriages had rough patches. She'd said I should try harder. She'd said Joel was a good man. She'd looked at me like I was being difficult. Grace Lutheran. The church I'd grown up in. The people who'd watched me get confirmed. They'd chosen Joel's version. They'd chosen the hardware store. They'd chosen the family that had been there for 5 generations. I stayed with a cousin in Duluth, Sarah. She'd left Stillwater 5 years before. She'd never asked why. She just said, come. I'd shown up at her door at 3 a.m. with a duffel bag and no plan. I'd driven 3 hours. I'd stopped twice to throw up. I'd kept driving. She'd made coffee. She'd given me her bed. She'd slept on the couch. She hadn't asked questions, not that night. She'd never asked what Joel had done. She just believed me. That was the first time in 2 years someone had. I filed for divorce. Joel's family lawyered up. They had the money. They had the connections. Peterson Hardware had been on Main Street since 1892. They knew every judge in the county. They dragged it out, 6 months, 8. Every hearing, Joel's mother would sit in the gallery. She'd look at me like I was something she'd stepped in. Joel's father would nod at the judge. They'd known each other for years. They'd served on the same boards. They dragged it out. They told the judge I was unstable, that I'd left without reason, that I was keeping his children from him. We didn't have children. We'd been trying. I'd miscarried twice. Joel had told people I'd lost the babies because of stress. My stress. My fault. I'd wanted to tell someone. I'd wanted to scream. I'd wanted to say he'd grabbed my arm the night before the second miscarriage. I'd wanted to say I'd been scared. I hadn't. The divorce went through. I didn't get much. The furniture, the couch we'd picked out together, the table from his grandmother, some of the savings. Joel kept the house. He kept the Peterson name. He kept the version of the story that made him the victim. I didn't fight for more. I didn't have the energy. I just wanted out. Sarah had helped me find a therapist. She'd helped me find a lawyer who wasn't from Stillwater. She'd done what my own family hadn't. She'd believed me. I'll never forget that. Joel kept most of it. His family's lawyer had seen to that. I didn't care. I'd gotten out. I'd gotten my name back. I'd gotten the space to breathe. Sarah had let me stay until I found a place. She'd helped me find a job. She'd never asked for details. She just believed me. That had been enough. Coercive control in a small town means everyone knows his last name. It means the pastor, the sheriff, the hardware store, they're all connected. It means leaving isn't just leaving a marriage, it's leaving everything. Document, tell someone outside the town, and when the walls close in, get out. I'm in Duluth now, different church, different hardware store, different last names. I found a job at a clinic. I found an apartment. I found a life that doesn't include Joel. I don't go back to Stillwater. I don't talk to the people who chose Joel. I don't drive past the Peterson house on Oak Street. I don't go to Grace Lutheran. I don't do a lot of things I used to do. My parents still live there. They still go to that church. They still see Joel's family. They've never said they believe me. They've never said they don't. Some silences are loud. My mother sends me cards at Christmas. She signs them from both of them. She never asks when I'm coming home. I think she knows the answer. I think she's known for a long time. I don't answer when they reach out. The woman on the hotline had said wanting to leave was enough. I'd held on to that. It was. Joel's still in Stillwater. He's still at the hardware store. He's probably remarried by now. He's probably telling his new wife she's too sensitive. He's probably making her doubt herself. I hope she gets out. I hope she has a Sarah. I hope she doesn't wait as long as I did. We're halfway through. Drop a comment with which story has hit hardest so far. It helps other viewers find this. Story 5, Hollow Ridge, West Virginia *. Hollow Ridge, population 600, one road in, one road out. The general store Miller's been there since 1921. The post office where everyone picks up their mail, the Baptist church. No stoplight, no fast food, no gas station for 12 miles, no police department. We're in the county. Sheriff's 30 minutes away. I'd lived there my whole life. Grew up in the house my grandfather built. Raised my kids there, widowed at 50. Frank had been gone 8 years. I'd gotten used to the quiet, to the space, to not having to check who was in the hallway. The house on Ridge Road, the one with the willow tree and the creek in the back. The kids had swung from that willow when they were small. Frank had proposed under it. I knew everyone. Everyone knew me. The general store, the post office, the Baptist church. I'd been baptized there. I'd buried Frank there. Small towns are like that, safe until they're not. until a man with a clipboard asks the wrong question and comes back. The man came to my door on a Tuesday in March. I'd been in the kitchen, I'd heard the doorbell. I'd looked through the peephole, clipboard, khaki pants, clean shaven. He'd looked like someone who could be from the government. He'd looked normal. He'd looked like the kind of person you'd trust. He said he was with the census, doing a follow-up. I'd done the census online. I said so. He said it was a random audit. He said they selected a percentage of households for verification. He said it would only take a minute. He asked how many people lived in the house. I said just me. He asked if I lived alone. The question stuck. Census doesn't ask like that. Census asks about household size, number of residents. He'd asked like it mattered, like he was making a list, like he was deciding something. I didn't answer. I wouldn't have answered if he'd asked about the weather. I closed the door. I watched through the window. He stood there for 5 minutes, not knocking again, not walking away, just standing, staring at the door, staring at the windows. The way he looked, like he was memorizing something, like he was making a plan, like he was deciding something. The ridge is quiet at that hour. I could hear the creek. I could hear the wind in the willow. I could hear my own heart. Then he walked to the next house. The Millers, the Carters, I watched him go. The way he moved, deliberate, purposeful, like he was on a schedule, like he had a list. I watched him mark the Miller house with a check on his clipboard. I watched him look at our porch light. I watched him pause at the Carters' mailbox before moving on. I thought about the Millers. Mrs. Miller was 80. She lived alone. Her husband had died 3 years ago. I'd bring her groceries sometimes. I'd check on her after church. I thought about the Carters. Mr. Carter had a bad heart. Mrs. Carter had mentioned it at the church picnic. I called the sheriff. They said they'd send a car. No one came. Hollow Ridge isn't a priority. Fewer patrols, fewer people. One sheriff's deputy for the whole county. I waited. I watched through the window. The road stayed dark. No headlights. No one came. That night I heard something at the back door, the handle, someone trying it. I was in the kitchen making tea. The sound of the handle turning, the quiet click, someone testing it, someone seeing if it would give. The backyard was dark, no motion lights. The porch was 3 steps from the door. I'd lived there 50 years. I'd never been scared in that house. I'd never locked the back door. Frank had always said we didn't need to. We knew everyone. The ridge had felt like family. The ridge had felt like home until it didn't. I turned on every light. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, watching the back door, waiting for it to turn again, waiting for morning. In the morning, I found footprints in the backyard, leading to the porch, leading away. The dew had settled, the grass was wet. The footprints were clear. Men's shoes, I could see the tread pattern, the way the heel had pressed deeper when he'd stepped onto the porch. I'd stood there with my coffee and stared at them. My hand had shaken, the coffee had sloshed. I'd backed away from the footprints like they might reach for me. I'd gone inside and locked the door. I'd called the sheriff. The willow tree cast long shadows. The creek was quiet. The ridge had felt safe my whole life. My grandfather had built this house. My children had learned to ride bikes in this yard. Frank had proposed under that willow. I'd never thought about footprints before. I'd never thought about who might be watching. I'd never thought about locking the back door. Frank had always said we didn't need to. Frank had always said we knew everyone. Frank hadn't met the man with the clipboard. I had, and I wished I hadn't. I'd never thought about the man with the clipboard. I think about him every time the doorbell rings now. The one who'd asked if I lived alone. The one who'd stood at my door for 5 minutes. The one who'd been to every house on the ridge. I'd thought about him that morning. I'd thought about him a lot. I took photos. I called the sheriff again. They came this time. They took a report. They said they'd increase patrols. They didn't. I installed cameras. I changed the locks. I asked the neighbors. Old Mrs. Carter said he'd been through the week before. She'd answered the door. She'd said she lived with her son. A lie, her son was in Ohio, because something about the way he'd asked had made her nervous. She'd told the Millers. they'd said the same, asking about who lived alone, asking about schedules, making notes. He'd been to every house on the ridge. He'd been taking inventory. He'd been deciding which doors to try. They never caught him. The sheriff said the footprints didn't match anyone in the county. They'd taken casts. They'd showed me photos. I'd had to look away. The cameras caught a figure in dark clothing the next night, too far away to identify, standing at the edge of the yard, looking at the house, at the windows, at where I'd be sleeping. I still have the footage. I've watched it maybe 100 times. I keep thinking I'll see something. A face. A license plate. Something that will tell me who he was. I never do. I still look at it sometimes. I still wonder who he was. I still wonder if he's still out there. I still jump when the doorbell rings. I still check the locks 3 times before bed. If someone shows up asking personal questions, don't answer. Trust your gut. And if they come back, call the police. Every time I kept the house. I couldn't afford to leave. I'd lived there my whole life. So I stay. Cameras on every entrance. Motion lights in the backyard. Locks changed. A plan for what I'll do if I hear the handle turn again. The willow tree still shades the creek. The grandkids still visit. They don't understand why Grandma checks the locks. They don't understand why I jump when the doorbell rings. I don't explain. I don't want them to be afraid. I don't want them to inherit my fear. But I check the locks 3 times before bed. I check the cameras every morning. I have a plan for what I'll do if I hear the handle turn again. Small towns aren't always safe. Sometimes they're just far from help. Sometimes the sheriff is 30 minutes away. Sometimes that's 30 minutes too long. Frank would have known what to do. Frank would have checked the locks. Frank would have been there, but Frank's gone. And I'm still here. And the ridge is still quiet. And the man with the clipboard is still out there. Somewhere, I have to believe that. I have to believe we're safe. I have to believe the cameras and the locks and the motion lights are enough. I don't know if they are. I check them anyway. In Red Oak, the past didn't stay buried. It showed up at the 20-year reunion and remembered your face. Sometimes the person who stalked you in high school never moved on. Sometimes 20 years isn't enough. Sometimes they have your yearbook, your parents' address, your Facebook group, everything they need to find you again. Story 6, Red Oak, Texas. Red Oak, population 12,000, right outside Dallas. The kind of place where everyone went to the same high school, where your parents went to the same high school, where the same families had been there for generations. Red Oak High, the Hawks, where the class of 2004 still had a Facebook group, where people still posted throwback photos, where the 20-year reunion was the biggest event of the fall. Megan had been planning it for months. She'd begged me to come. She'd said it wouldn't be the same without me. She'd said we'd have fun. She'd said we'd catch up. She'd said it had been too long. She'd been right about that. I'd left Red Oak at 18. I'd left for a reason. I'd left Tyler Moss. I'd left the notes on my car. I'd left the 50 missed calls. I'd left and I'd never looked back. Went to college in Austin. Stayed. Built a life. I'd never been back. Not really. Not for more than a weekend at my parents' place. But my best friend from high school, Megan, had begged me to come. She'd organized the whole thing. The VFW hall, the DJ, the barbecue. I said I'd go. I regretted it the moment I walked in. The same faces, older. The same cliques shifted. I'd been talking to Megan at the bar when I felt someone watching. The VFW hall was loud. The DJ playing 90s hits, the smell of barbecue and stale beer, the same faces I'd known since high school. Someone had hung a banner, "Welcome back, Hawks." 20 years. I'd smiled when I saw it. I'd let Megan drag me in, but I felt it. The weight of someone's eyes. I turned. He was across the room, staring. The way he looked at me, like he'd been waiting, like he'd known I'd come. Like this was exactly where he was supposed to be. I didn't recognize him at first. Then I did. Tyler Moss. We dated for 6 months senior year. He'd been possessive, clingy. I'd broken it off. He'd not taken it well. He'd shown up at my house. He'd called 50 times. He'd left notes on my car. I'd told my parents. They'd talked to his. It had stopped. I'd left for college. I'd forgotten. I'd built a life. I'd assumed he had too. He hadn't. He crossed the room. The VFW hall was loud, the DJ, the barbecue smell, the laughter, but I heard every word. He said my name. He said he'd thought about me every day for 20 years. He said he'd known I'd come. He'd been waiting. The way he said it, like it was fate, like we were meant to be. I made an excuse. I said I had to use the bathroom. My voice had gone thin. Megan had looked at me. I'd waved her off. I'd walked toward the restroom. I'd felt his eyes on my back. I'd known he was following. I'd turned. He'd stopped. He'd smiled. I went to the restroom. I texted Megan. I said I was leaving. I said I'd explain later. I slipped out the side door. Parking lot was full. I found my car. I got in. I locked the doors. I sat there for a minute. My hands were shaking. I'd left my purse at the bar. I didn't go back. I drove to Austin, 4 hours. I didn't stop. I blocked him on Facebook. I blocked the class of 2004 group. I'd sat in my car in the VFW parking lot for 10 minutes before I could drive. I'd watched the door. I'd half expected him to come out, to follow me, to find my car. He hadn't, not that night. I thought that was it. I thought I'd left him in Red Oak. I thought 20 years and 400 miles would be enough. It wasn't. The messages started. New accounts. New numbers. He'd found my address. He'd found my job. He'd found my routines. Austin is 4 hours from Red Oak. He'd drive down on weekends. I'd see his car. I'd see him at the grocery store, at the coffee shop, at the park where I ran. He'd be there. He'd be watching. He'd never approach when anyone else was around. He'd just be there. A red car in the parking lot, a figure at the edge of the park. I'd stop running. I'd go home. I'd check the locks. I went to the police, restraining order. They'd granted it. He'd violated it twice. He'd been seen at my building. He'd been seen in my parking lot. He'd gotten a warning. The third time, they'd said. The third time they'd arrest him. He got a warning. The third time he was in my apartment. I came home from work. I'd had a long day. I'd stopped for groceries. I'd carried the bags up the stairs. I'd put my key in the lock. The door had opened before I turned it. It had been unlocked. I'd stood there on the landing with my groceries. I'd run through the morning. Had I left in a hurry? Had I forgot? I'd never forgotten before. I'd been careful since the restraining order. I'd made it a habit, keys in hand, lock check, every time. I thought I'd forgot. I thought I'd been careless. I'd walked in. I put the groceries on the counter. I'd turned toward the living room. I'd stopped. Everything had stopped. He was sitting on my couch, in my apartment, in Austin, 4 hours from Red Oak. He said he'd picked the lock. He said he'd learned how on YouTube. He said he'd needed to see where I lived. He said he'd known I'd understand eventually. I backed out. I didn't run. I walked backward. My keys were in my hand. My phone was in my pocket. I made it to the hallway. I made it to the stairwell. I called 911 from the landing. I gave them my address. I gave them his name. I said he was in my apartment. I said I had a restraining order. They came. They arrested him. Violation of a protective order. Burglary. The responding officer had asked me if I was okay. I'd said yes. I'd been standing in the hallway in my coat still, my groceries on the landing. I hadn't been able to go back in. I hadn't been able to walk past the living room, past the couch where he'd been sitting, where he'd made himself at home. He'd picked the lock. He'd been inside. He'd sat on my couch. He'd made himself at home. He got 60 days. He's out now. I moved. I didn't wait for him to get out. I found a new apartment. I didn't tell my old landlord where I was going. I changed my number. I deleted social media. I left the class of 2004 group. I left Red Oak behind. Again, I don't go to reunions anymore. I don't look at the class of 2004 Facebook group. I blocked everyone from Red Oak High. I blocked the town. I blocked the memory of who I was when I thought Tyler Moss was just a bad breakup. The past doesn't stay in small towns. It has your address. It has your high school yearbook. It remembers your face. Sometimes it gets out. Sometimes it gets a car. Sometimes it drives 4 hours to sit on your couch. Sometimes it follows you home. Tyler's out now. I don't know where he is. I don't want to know. I've moved twice since the apartment. I've changed my number again. I've stopped going to places where I might run into someone from Red Oak. Megan and I don't talk anymore. She said she understood. She said she was sorry. She said she'd never have invited him if she'd known. It wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. I just had to get away. I had to get away from all of it. In Pine Grove, his family didn't just run the town. They ran your life. Story 7, Pine Grove, Oregon. Pine Grove, population 3,000, logging town. The mill on the river, you could hear it from anywhere, the low thrum of the saws, the trucks at dawn when the loggers started their shifts. The smell of sawdust hung in the air. It got in your hair, your clothes. You carried it home. The tavern on Main, the one place that wasn't a Brenner property. Even that they tried to buy. The Brenner family. The Brenners had owned the mill for 3 generations. They'd built the school. They'd built the clinic. They built the town. They ran the town. The mayor was a Brenner. The sheriff had married a Brenner. The school board was half Brenners. If you worked in Pine Grove, you worked for the Brenners. One way or another, the mayor was a Brenner. The sheriff had married a Brenner. The school board was half Brenners. I'd met Drew Brenner at the tavern. He was charming. He was attentive. He remembered my name. My favorite beer, the way I liked my eggs. We moved in together after a year. I thought I'd landed something good. I hadn't. The control started slowly. Questions about where I'd been, who I'd talked to. Then my phone, he'd borrow it to look something up, hand it back. I'd find it in a different place. I'd find apps I hadn't opened, then my keys. I came home one day and they weren't where I'd left them. I searched for an hour. He watched from the couch. Eventually I found them in his jacket pocket. He'd been wearing that jacket when I came in. He'd known the whole time. Then my job, he'd asked his cousin at the mill to lay me off. Said I'd be happier at home. Said I'd been stressed. Said it would be better for our relationship. I'd gotten the call on a Tuesday. Budget cuts. They had to let people go. I'd been there 2 years. I'd been good at it. I'd had no warning. I'd come home and told him. He'd said we'd figure it out. He'd said he made enough. He'd said I should take some time. Within a month, he was helping with the budget. Within 2 months, I was asking permission to buy shampoo. I had no savings, no car in my name. We traded mine in when his had needed work. Nowhere to go. My sister was in Portland 3 hours. I didn't have gas money. I didn't have a phone he hadn't paid for. I didn't have anything that was mine. I tried to leave once. 6 months before I actually left, I'd packed a bag. I'd hidden it in the closet. I'd called my sister in Portland. She'd said come. She'd said she'd send money for gas. Drew had come home early. He'd found the bag. He'd taken my phone. He'd asked who I'd been talking to. I'd said no one. He'd gone through my call history. He'd seen Sarah's number. He'd said his family would make sure I never got custody of anything. We had a dog, that was it, but he'd said I'd lose everything. He'd said if I left, he'd tell everyone I was unstable, that I'd been cheating, that I'd been the problem. I'd stayed. I'd unpacked the bag. I'd waited for another chance. I'd waited 6 months. I'd watched for the right moment. I'd learned when he drank too much. I'd learned when he'd pass out. I'd learned to have a bag ready. He'd said if I left, he'd tell everyone I was unstable, that I'd been cheating, that I'd been the problem. He'd said his family would make sure I never worked in this town again. He'd said they'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I was. His mother had already started. I'd seen her at the grocery store, Brenner's Market, they owned that too, and she'd looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. I'd heard from a friend that she'd told people I was difficult, that I didn't appreciate Drew, that I was lucky he'd put up with me. The Brenner family had run Pine Grove for 3 generations. The mill, the mayor's office, the school board, the whole town was on his side. I had no one. I finally left at 3 a.m. He'd passed out on the couch. Whiskey, the game. I'd waited until his breathing was deep. I'd counted to 100. I'd counted again. I'd made sure. I'd grabbed my bag. I'd packed it a week before, hidden it in the closet. I'd slept next to it. I'd woken up every hour to check it was still there, to check he hadn't found it. I'd taken my documents, some clothes, the cash I'd been hiding in a book, $23. I'd been saving it for months, $1 here, $2 there, from the grocery money. From the change he'd left on the counter, I'd walked to the gas station, the one on the edge of town, the one that was open all night. My feet had hurt. I'd worn the wrong shoes, slippers, because I'd had to move fast. The pavement had been cold. The streetlights had flickered. I'd kept looking back. I thought I'd heard his truck. I thought I'd heard him calling my name. I just kept walking. I'd called my sister from the pay phone. She'd said she was coming. She'd said to wait. She'd said she'd be there in 3 hours. I'd waited. I'd sat on the curb. I'd watched the trucks go by. Logging trucks, Brenner trucks. The logo on the side. I'd thought about how small I was, how far I had to go. How every mile between me and Pine Grove was a mile I'd never give back. I'd left everything. The dog, the clothes, the life. The person I'd been when I thought Drew was everything I wanted. The dog, the clothes, the life. Drew's family spread rumors. They said I'd left with another man. They said I'd had a breakdown. I didn't care. I was in Portland. I was free. Coercive control in a company town means there's no one to tell. No one who will believe you. No one who isn't connected. Document. Tell someone outside. And when his last name is on every building, get out. I didn't take the dog. I think about her sometimes. I hope he's kind to her. I hope she's not another thing he uses to hurt. I'm in Portland now. I have a new job. I have friends who don't know the Brenners. I have a life that doesn't include Drew. I sleep through the night most of the time. I told myself that would be enough. That getting out would be enough. That distance would be enough. It wasn't, not at first. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. I'd think I heard his footsteps. I'd think I heard the door. I'd have to get up. I'd have to check. I'd have to prove to myself I was safe. But when I hear ice clinking in a glass, when someone raises their voice, I still tense. Some things don't go away. Getting out is just the first step. Drew's still in Pine Grove. He's still a Brenner. He's still untouchable. I've heard he's with someone new. I've heard she's younger. I've heard the same rumors about her that they spread about me. I don't know if they're true. I don't want to know. I hope she gets out. I hope she has a sister in Portland. I hope she leaves before he takes everything, like he took from me. The house next to yours had been empty for 2 years. You told yourself that meant you had privacy. You were wrong. Sometimes empty doesn't mean empty. Sometimes the for sale sign means no one's checking. Sometimes the footsteps you hear are real. Sometimes someone's been watching through a hole in the ceiling. Story 8, Millerton, New Hampshire ***. Millerton, population 1,400. White church on the green, the one from 1782, the one in every photo. General store with the wooden floor. The old Victorians on Elm Street. The kind of street the realtor had called charming. The kind of street I'd believed would be safe. The kind of street that showed up in calendar photos. The kind of street that felt like a different time. In fall, the maples turned. In winter, the snow stayed white until the plows came. I'd walked it at dusk and thought I'd found something good. I'd bought the house at 214 Elm, the one with the blue shutters. I'd paid too much. I'd wanted the character, the history, the way the light came through the windows in the afternoon. I'd wanted to believe I could have a life there, a quiet life, a safe life. The house next door, 218, had been empty since the Holcombs had moved to Florida. For sale, no buyers. The realtor, Janet Wyman, had told me it had been on the market for 2 years. The Holcombs had lowered the price twice. Still nothing. I'd gotten used to the silence. No footsteps above. No lights in the windows, no one watching. I told myself that meant privacy. I'd been wrong. The house at 214 had cost more than I could afford. I'd wanted the character, the history, the blue shutters. I hadn't thought about what it meant to share a wall with an empty house. I hadn't thought about who might be on the other side. Then November, the sound started. At first I thought it was the house. Old construction, pipes, wind. The house was from the 1880s. It had character. It had sounds. One night I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening. Left, right, pause, left, right, pause, someone pacing, someone thinking. The Holcombs had moved. The house was empty. The realtor had said so. I'd seen the sign. I'd seen the dark windows, so why was I hearing footsteps? I went to the realtor, Janet Wyman. Her office is on Main. I said I'd heard someone in 218. She said the house was empty. She'd check. She never did. The sounds got louder, furniture shifting, a voice muffled. I couldn't make out words. I'd lie in bed and stare at the ceiling. The house at 214 was from the 1880s. High ceilings, crown molding. The kind of place that had character. The kind of place that had sounds. I told myself it was the building. Old pipes, wind, settling. I told myself that for weeks. Then I heard something being dragged. Heavy, deliberate, across the floor above me. The apartment above me was 218, the empty one, the one for sale. I knocked on the door, no answer. I tried the knob, locked. A layer of dust. I pressed my ear to the door, silence. Then the footsteps started again, from inside, from the empty apartment. I went to the realtor again. Janet said she'd send someone to check. No one came. I lay awake at night. The house at 218 was dark. The realtor sign swayed in the wind. No one had looked at it in months. 2 weeks later, I came home and my door was ajar. Not wide open, just slightly. Nothing inside was missing. Nothing was moved. But I knew. I installed a camera. I installed a chain. I started checking my closet before I slept. Then I found it. I was changing a light bulb in my bedroom. I noticed a dark spot in the corner near the window I shared with 218, a small hole, the size of a pencil. When I looked up, I could see light, a pinprick, the kind you'd miss if you weren't looking. Someone had drilled through from the other side. Someone had been looking down, into my room, at me. I'd thought about all the nights I'd changed in that room. I'd thought about all the times I'd thought I was alone. I'd thought about the footsteps, the pacing. The person I'd told myself was just the building settling. I'd been wrong. Someone had been looking down into my room at me. I didn't wait. I grabbed my phone, my wallet, a change of clothes. I left everything else. I left the furniture. I left the books. I left the life I'd built in that apartment. I got in my car. I drove. I didn't know where I was going. I pulled over when I could breathe. I called the police from the side of the road. I gave them the address. I told them what I'd found. They got a warrant. I'd given them my key. I'd given them everything. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to see that apartment again. They found evidence someone had been living in 218 without the Holcombs' knowledge. Squatting, food wrappers, a sleeping bag, a hot plate. The realtor had never checked. The Holcombs had never come by. The empty house had been empty until it wasn't. I'd walked past 218 every day. I told myself it was fine. I told myself empty meant safe. I'd been wrong about a lot of things, and photographs of me through the hole, sleeping, undressing, living, dozens of them, different nights, different angles. The detective showed me a few. I couldn't look at most of them. There was one from a Tuesday I'd worn the blue shirt. There was one from the night I'd had friends over. He'd been watching then too, through the hole, while we'd laughed in the living room, while I'd thought I was safe in my own home. He said they'd found other things too, notes, a schedule, my work hours, the address of my office. He'd been tracking me. He'd known when I'd be home, when I'd be asleep. He'd known my routine better than I did. They never caught him. The case is still open. I still get a call from the detective every few months. Any new leads? No, nothing. I dread those calls. I want them to catch him. I'm also afraid of what will happen when they do. I moved to Concord. I don't live next to empty houses anymore. If you hear footsteps from an empty house, don't wait. Leave. I live in Concord now. I looked at dozens of apartments. I turned down everyone that had an empty unit next door. I turned down everyone where I can't inspect the shared walls. I asked the landlord at my current place if I could see the unit next door before I signed. He'd looked at me funny. I'd said I had anxiety about neighbors. He'd shown me. The unit was occupied. I could hear someone watching TV. I'd signed. I check every ceiling, look at the corners, every time I turn off the light. I change my clothes in the bathroom. Door locked. Paranoid. Maybe. It's what I need to feel safe. You never really get over knowing someone was watching. You never stop looking for the hole. The detective called last month. No new leads. The case is still open. The man who'd been in 218, they'd never identified him. He'd been careful. He'd left no prints. He'd left no trace except the hole, except the photographs, except the violation. I live with that. I live with knowing he's out there. I live with knowing I'll never feel safe next to an empty house again. I've accepted that. Some cost you just pay. Last one, Ashford, where the danger came with last call. Sometimes the regular who tips well is the one who's been watching. The one who knows your schedule. The one who slips in when you take the trash out. The one who's been waiting for the night you close alone. Story 9, Ashford, Wisconsin. Ashford, population 800. The tavern on Main. Hank's, been there since 1947. Wood paneling dark with age. Neon beer signs that buzzed when the lights were low. The smell of beer and peanuts in the fryer from the kitchen. The floor sticks a little by the bar. Everyone knows, the regulars at the bar, the same faces, the same stories, the same jokes. I'd been tending for 3 years. I'd moved there from Madison. I'd wanted something quieter. I'd wanted a place where I could breathe. I'd thought Hank's was that place. I'd thought small towns were safe. I'd thought a lot of things. I knew the rhythms, knew who drank too much, knew who to watch, or thought I did. Carl came in maybe twice a week. Always alone, always polite. He tipped well. He never bothered anyone. He'd sit at the end of the bar, the stool by the window, the one that looked out on Main Street, and watch the room. Hank's has wood paneling, neon beer signs. The kind of place where everyone knows your name. Carl knew mine. I'd given it to him when he'd asked. I'd thought nothing of it. Bartenders give their names. It's part of the job. I hadn't known he'd been storing it, building a file. He'd sit at the end of the bar and watch the room. I'd started noticing things. The way he'd arrive right when my shift started, the way he'd leave when I got my break, the way he always had a clear view of the register, the way he'd note when I was alone, shy, maybe, lonely. Small towns have a lot of people like that. I told myself that. I told myself he was harmless. I told myself a lot of things. I'd make small talk when I had a moment. He'd ask about my shift, about the neighborhood, about whether I liked working nights. I gave short answers. Bar talk, he'd linger sometimes after he'd finished his drink. I'd tell him we were closing. He'd nod and leave, but he'd always look back. One night I closed up alone. Hank had left early. The kitchen was closed. The last customer had left half an hour before. I'd locked the door. I'd flipped the sign. I was counting the register when I heard the door. I'd checked it twice. The alley had been empty when I'd taken the trash out. I hadn't been careful enough. Carl was inside, standing there, watching me. I hadn't heard the lock turn. He must have slipped in when I'd taken the trash out. The dumpster was in the alley. I'd been gone maybe 2 minutes. I'd thought the bar was empty. I'd thought I was alone. Main Street at 2 a.m., the streetlights, the empty sidewalks. Ashford closed early. The only light had been from Hank's, from me. I'd been the only one on the street. I'd been the only one he could see. He must have been waiting in the alley in a doorway, somewhere where he could see when the last customer left, when I'd locked the door, when I'd turned my back. He said he'd forgotten his wallet. I said we were closed. He said he just wanted to talk, alone. I reached for my phone. He moved fast. He was around the bar before I could dial. he didn't touch me. He just stood there close and said he'd been watching me for months. He said he knew my schedule. He said he knew I walked home alone. He said he'd been thinking about what that must feel like walking through the empty streets at 2 a.m. He said he wanted me to know he was there. I backed toward the kitchen. The bar was between us, then it wasn't. He'd moved around it. He was closer now. I could smell his breath, beer and something else, something minty, like he'd planned this. I said I'd call the police. My voice had cracked. He'd smiled. Not like he was sorry, like he'd known I'd say that, like he'd known exactly how I'd react. He said he'd go, didn't want to scare me. He'd see me tomorrow. He left. Walked out like we'd had a normal conversation. Like he hadn't just told me he'd been watching me for months. Like he hadn't just gotten around the bar without an invitation. The door closed behind him. I stood there. The register was still open. The lights were still on. Main Street was still empty. I'd never felt so alone. The tavern was empty. Main Street at 2 a.m., no one out. I stood there shaking. I didn't call the police that night. I told myself I'd overreacted. I told myself that all the way home, I'd walked fast. I'd kept looking over my shoulder. I'd locked my door and sat with my back against it. He hadn't touched me, hadn't threatened me, not in words. A week later, a woman from the next town over reported a man matching his description. She'd been tending bar at a place in the next county. She'd closed up alone. He'd been waiting in the parking lot. He'd known her name. He'd known where she lived. He'd known she walked home. The police connected him to 3 other incidents: bartenders, service workers, women who'd been alone when they closed. I gave a statement. I drove to the sheriff's office. I sat in the same fluorescent lit room as a dozen other people who'd had bad nights. I told them everything. I wish I'd called that first night. I wish I'd trusted my gut. I wish I'd known that he didn't touch me isn't the same as I was safe. I left Hank's. I work at a different place now. I don't close alone anymore. If someone makes you uncomfortable, trust it. You don't owe anyone the benefit of the doubt. Your discomfort is enough. I work at a place in the next county now. 2 people close every night, policy. I made it a condition of taking the job. Hank understood, or he said he did. I tell every new bartender I train, never close alone. Never assume the regulars are harmless. Never assume small towns mean small dangers. Carl still comes into Hank's sometimes. I've heard. A friend from Ashford told me. She said he sits at the same stool. She said he watches the new bartender. She said she's thought about saying something. She said she doesn't want to cause trouble. I don't go back to Ashford. I don't drive through. I don't visit. I don't need to. I have enough of Ashford in my head. The way he'd moved around the bar. The way he'd stood too close. The way he'd said he'd see me tomorrow. I still don't know if it was a promise or a threat. I prefer not to find out. Hank still runs the tavern. He never said he was sorry. He never said he'd change the policy. He never said he'd make sure no one closed alone. I heard he did. After I left. After the woman from the next town came forward. After the police connected the incidents. I'd like to think I helped with that. I'd like to think something good came out of it. I'd like to think the next bartender won't have to go through what I did. I don't know if that's true. I hope it is. We'll end there, but if any of this sounded familiar, you're not alone. That's it. 9 stories from 9 small towns across America. The thing about small towns is everyone knows your name, your schedule, where you work, where you live. That feels like safety until the wrong person knows too much. Until the whole town is on their side. If any of this resonated, you're not alone. A lot of us ignored our gut feeling. A lot of us wish we hadn't. If you're in the middle of something like this right now, document everything. Tell people, get out. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for it to get worse. Your safety matters more than being polite, more than the job, more than what anyone will think. If these kept you listening, hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you're from. It helps the algorithm find people who need to hear this. Trust your gut, and we'll see you in the next one.